I know Hudson Mohawke online, but I've also been a huge fan and follower of all of, well, I guess I can call you Ross or Hudmo. What would you prefer?
Of course, yeah.
Huge fan of everything that Ross has been putting out into the world for the past decade plus. And also just as a fellow Glaswegian, it's amazing to see such phenomenal success from someone else from such a place. And we've both ended up in LA, which is quite wonderful. But Ross, I wanted to start today by asking you, a little bit of background questions about sort of growing up in Glasgow. I appreciate how multifaceted and genre bending that city is anyway. And I don't think many people who have never been or experienced it really get to grips with how rich the city is for so many different types of music, and for being at the really the foreground of so many different cultures of music.
Yeah.
For you, what was it like growing up there, and how did it inform your earliest musical tastes?
I mean, I still, I'll never not consider Glasgow to be my home, I since spent a bunch of time, spent almost 10 years living in London, spent a bunch of time living in Amsterdam, now in LA. I think I always say I feel like it's partially because like it's kind of like it's a bit of a grim place. Like it's and I tend to think those kind of places often lead to a little bit more kind of like just a slightly more kind of like debaucherous attitude. I think there's always been great parties there. There's always been I guess a little bit of a sense of even I guess at the point where we were growing up, it was like I guess we missed most of the real like rough shit in Glasgow, as far as the kind of, there was a real sort of post-industrial like meltdown of it was a major like industrial city, and that all went to shit, and became quite a sort of deprived place. And I think certainly we grew up with the kind of aftermath of that. Just a lot of people in our parents' generation and our grandparents' generation had gone through some really awful shit in Glasgow, just in terms of how deprived it had become and how sort of kind of gnarly of a place it had become. And I think that coupled with the fact it's kind of like visually it's not like the most inspiring kind of place. It's kind of gray, and like there's a lot of great architecture and things like that, but it's usually kind of pretty shitty weather and like not that. And I think that those kind of circumstances can often lead people into finding a little bit of a imaginative escape from the sort of grimness of it, into like putting that into some sort of creative outlet. So I think that aspect of it coupled with, there's I guess there's for a long time there's been a really great like art school there, where a lot of there's obviously been a lot of great bands that have been coming out of there forever, but there's just been a scene of like people who are interested in, having a good sort of party, but not being like tied to like it has to be this sound or it has to be this particular thing. It has, in my experience, it's tended to lean more towards like people being appreciative of being able to go on a night out and hear like a bunch of different genres and styles of music, and not be tied to like, we only listen to this, we only go to parties that play this or this kind of thing. And that definitely informed my kind of take on things, as well as far as my own approach to production.
Yeah, I mean, you started Lucky, well, you were part of starting Lucky Me in Glasgow, which was, and it continues to be a really influential home for new sounds, particularly in electronic music.
Yeah.
And for you, like, what were your access points to getting into that? What was, do you have formative memories of the time? Was it a communal physical experience that you were having going to certain club nights, or was it more you're escaping into your own kind of like hatch of inspiration?
A strange kind of mixture of both, basically.
Yeah.
Because I think we, I'd say this in every single interview, but like what I really like started out listening to at like 8, 9, 10 years old via one of my cousins was like really just like rave and happy hardcore music. And that was, I was too young at that point to have been like involved in that scene while it was happening in the sort of like mid to late 90s. Because I was like, I think we were literally born, like, we're both born in the, I'm not even going to say the year, but I think we're both born.
I think we are the same age.
Yeah. We're just slightly too young to have caught like the prime of that era. But
yeah,
then I was hearing all this music via my cousin on these like tape packs and things like that, and was really just like, what the fuck is this? Like, where is this like imaginary fantasy place where this is happening? Because like I don't have any context on what that is at all, like zero sort of idea of anything to do with that beyond just purely the music itself. So I was like really enthralled with that. And I guess then within that music, what those guys were doing at that point was like inadvertently, a lot of them had that style of sort of early rave dance music was lifting a lot from like rap and hip hop in terms of like sampling drum breaks and sampling little vocal snippets and acapellas and things like that, and all the sort of scratching elements and things like that. That was all bleeding into like the sort of rave music side of things, but it actually come from, hip hop in the first place. So I got really into the like turntablist side of it.
Yeah.
Like really became really fascinated by that, and that was like right at the time also when we had a guy called Plus One, who was like Scottish turntablist guy, who at that point, sort of like late 90s, was, you know, real like top of the world with that stuff. And he had A-Track had just become like world champion at like 15 years old or some shit like that. And I was like, what the fuck is this? This is unbelievable. I don't know what this is.
Yeah.
And so then I got really into the turntable side of things. The turntable side of things led to me getting more into like sort of 90s hip hop stuff, because that was very affiliated with that world. So I was doing like DMC, I'm sort of rambling on here, but I was doing like DMC battles and things like that for a while. And was like alongside that getting into playing around with production, because there used to be there was like a PlayStation game where it was basically like a music production game, PlayStation game. And I remember, like, you know, I think that would have come out, I think the first one of that came out in 1998 or something like that, or 1999 maybe. Right. And I remember reading, like in DJ Mag at the time, being like 12 or 13, and reading that there was like this PlayStation game that was coming out that you were going to be able to like make your own music on. And like at that age, like I had no hopes of like buying any professional music equipment or anything like that. You know, I just didn't, that wasn't an option. And I remember reading that and being like, fuck, this is going to like change everything. To be able to get this thing for like, you know, £20 or whatever it was at that point. And that was like a huge thing for me. I remember like doing my final, you know, I never know what the equivalent term is here, but like doing, you know, higher music in school. I don't, whatever the fucking equivalent of that is, like, like music class in high school, essentially. And like submitting something I'd made on that as like my final project, and submitting it on like mini disc to them at the and them just being like, what is this? You know, what have we done here? And luckily, like, I had a teacher at that point who was like super encouraging and open to the idea of like, right, you didn't just like make this on like the little Casio keyboards that we have here. You've gone away and like done your own thing, and was like supportive of that, thankfully. But yeah, so from there, I was getting into, got into production from the PlayStation stuff. Eventually got didn't have a PC or anything. We eventually got like a family PC, and then I was able to get like EJ or whatever it was called back then.
Right.
And eventually got a hold of what was then called Fruity Loops, now FL Studio, which is like still what I use today. Right. And I don't know, I think there's something about I'm kind of going off on a tangent here again, but there's definitely something about, like, you know, getting into these, regardless of what it is, getting into something like as a teenager, when like you're just you know, you don't even realize it, but you're just absorbing. You're just like have this voracious act, like, you know, you're just able to just like suck in information,
Totally.
learn things really quickly, and it's just a really, you know, uh, I feel like it's a great period for just like being able to immerse yourself in things and not even really realize that you're doing it at the time. But like at that point, I would like come home from school and I would be like on my turntables for like 8 hours or whatever, and just lose the rest of the evening, not even realize,
Totally.
And
your your story is really relatable and important, I think, because it speaks to such a way of being resourceful with the limited means that you had. I mean, it's kind of incredible that you sort of your first steps to becoming who you are was a PlayStation game. That's
and I think that's like a big I didn't for the I guess the first couple of years of like wanting to DJ, I had like a hi-fi turntable that someone, so like a family friend, had given us or something. It doesn't have any like pitch control or anything like that, and then just like a tape deck. And it was like, right, how can I like manually move this turntable to try and match the beat match to the cassette tape that's playing, basically.
Right.
Like no means of like actually beat matching anything other than like, well, I guess if you spun this with your hand a bit faster, you might be able to get it at the same speed as the tape that's playing, and then like flick between the two sources on the hi-fi or whatever.
Totally.
And yeah, I mean, I didn't have a pair of like Technics turntables till like 5 or 6 years after that, and that was like a major thing.
Yeah,
but I think that's a very, I sometimes like, I sometimes think about that a lot these days, that there's such an overwhelming amount of access to like infinite ways of making music, which is amazing, but sometimes it's nice to like be forced to work with like within a certain framework of limitations.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's a trade-off. It's a weird kind of trade-off.
It's true of so many mediums now, actually. It's kind of, you're sort of hamstrung by consumers' choice before you're able to even create anything. But kind of like fast forwarding, because I know we only have limited time.
I completely missed out the entire part there about the label and all that.
No. Well, let's fast forward to some of the kind of, because I think they've got a flavor of how you approached breaking into the industry, which was basically a very DIY kind of story. But in terms of some of your bigger monumental moments with regards signing to Warp and forming Tonight with Lunis, and then going on to be, to being recognized by Kanye's Good Music label and getting the opportunity to work with such a diverse range of artists. Talk me through some of the kind of the highs and conversely the lows of that kind of rush of that few years of your life.
I think I'd always from the when I was like really getting fully sort of embracing, like, I really want to, like, because up till a certain point I was like heavily focused on like turntablism and DJing and that kind of thing, and it was a point where I was like, just beginning to move towards, I really want to like learn more about production and just, I really feel like that's a more interesting, you know, outlet of my creativity. I was always like, I always had an impression of like, or I always was questioning why in the world of like the wider world of like popular music, why it often seemed to my ears like the production was kind of like an afterthought,
Right.
or that it was always like nobody was really nobody was really exploring like, you can have a really, you know, popular you know, you can make a culturally impactful major pop song and also have interesting production, and the two things are not like mutually exclusive or whatever, you know. And I guess like Pharrell was exploring a lot of that at that point, and Timbaland and things like that, where they were really like, even you listen back to some of those now, the levels of like experimentation in a lot of those productions are in some sense far beyond what is in like the current sound of like, you know, pop, whatever. So I was always really interested in like, from that early point, like why can't you have like interesting production and like combine that with like major artists, major pop music, major rap, R&B, whatever. And so like I always had this sort of vision of like, I feel like I can do that. I feel like I can see where the sort of touch points are, where those things kind of intersect. I really want to like explore that. And was doing that for a number of years, and I think like that's, you know, that's still like what I'm very interested in. And I think like I just, it's still an issue I have to this day with a lot of things. I'm like, well, why is like this considered like underground and this considered like mainstream, whatever, and like you can't, there's nothing in between, you know? Why is that? Where does that come from? Why is that thing? And so I guess I always was like, I don't see any reason why this isn't doable. Let me just fucking try and see if there's an avenue where I can explore that and have it work. And I guess I've been putting out records for a couple of years. I put out a couple of records where I just like taken acapellas from R&B songs and things like that and just layered them over my production and put them out as like white label bootleg records and things like that. And I guess after a certain point, I think it was like, I already had a bunch of music out, and this was maybe like 2010, 2011. And we've been doing these parties for a couple of years alongside like a lot of Lucky Me stuff, and then a lot of the Numbers guys from Glasgow as well. And, Joe Shabadoo and various other people. And I'd been on and off playing at Deviation, which is Benji B's party in London. And I think via Benji, he knew this, at that point, sort of mysterious character called Virgil, and who's now gone on to everybody knows who the fuck Virgil Abloh is. But I remember getting getting a random email one day from this person called Virgil being like, "Oh, we'd really like you to come to the studio in London and play us some stuff and see if we can work on something." And that's kind of how all that began. And I remember, because I was at a festival. I was playing at some festival somewhere in Europe, and I remember getting that email and being like, either this is just a hoax, or this is going to be fucking amazing. And thankfully, it panned out, and I worked on a lot of material with those guys. And I guess excuse me, the ups of that are you don't really there aren't really artists nowadays, despite what anyone may say about various ramblings and whatever else. There aren't many artists in the wider scheme of worldwide artists who still kind of do whatever the fuck they want. That's regardless of if you like them or not. That really counts for a lot, especially nowadays, where even a lot of the biggest artists, it's somewhere along the line, it's kind of neutered and held within a certain framework and things like that. So to have the experience to be able to work in a group of people where it's not only operating at the highest level, but also there's not really any rules. That's my dream combination of things to be involved in. And I guess the downside of that is that I'm kind of a pretty shy person, and not all that great being in the spotlight, and not all that great dealing with a lot of attention and things like that. And that element of it, I didn't really realize at the time, but that element of it was not that great for me in many other ways.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you go through all of that. I wonder if it might be an idea for the students on the call who are interested in advice on production side of things, whether it might be an idea at this point to go through your session as an example of how you put something together.
Sure. Yeah.
If you want to share your screen.
Yeah, I'll do that. And I think I would also say, I think that, and I certainly spent a long time doing this myself as well, but the is certainly to ask what compression settings do you use for fucking XYZ whatever, and I think at this point in my career, whatever, it's become apparent to me that sounds incredibly cliche and incredibly like LA, but like it's become more apparent to me that like how I how I manage my time and how I sort of look after my fucking mental health and things like that are far more important to maintaining feeling creative, rather than just like how many dBs of high-end EQ there is on a snare drum or something like that,
Yeah.
But aside from that, I'll now talk about how many dBs of EQ are on headphones. Let me do this. Do this. And you can let me know if you can hear any of that. You getting that?
Yep.
So like this is a song. I have a project at the moment with my friend Tiga, who's a Canadian techno mastermind, that we became friends like a couple of years ago. Became friends 7 years ago, something like that. We had the same booking agent for a while, even though we were playing completely different types of music, and became really good friends, and are now, we're working on an album together at the moment. And this was, I was just thinking of like what session I might open and go through, and this is a relatively simple one to dissect. So this was the first song we put out. It actually came out like mid-quarantine, so we haven't had any chance to like do live shows yet, but we have a couple of festivals coming up in the next couple of months. So this was a song that we did called Love Minus Zero, and I'll play you through it. I mean, the idea, it's also part of the, I mean, we're very keen, and I'm also very keen on, I don't necessarily mind collaborating kind of virtually, but I think that the experience of being in the room together, despite that having not been possible for a long time, the experience of being in a room together where you're bouncing ideas off one another, and as you're doing that, you're sort of like, oh, and remember this thing that you load up on YouTube, and remember this, and this leads to like this story and this conversation, and like, things like that can be lost when you're just like sending a bunch of files to another person and getting something back. I really think that that's an equally important part of the creative process, is like, what was the I hate fucking word vibe, but like, what was like the vibe and the energy, the conversations and the various like touch points of like, what if we incorporated an element of this? Remember this song? What about that? And bringing these things together. I think that's that for me nowadays. It's a really important to be able to do that in the room. So this is something that we did together here, sort of. When did we do this? Like early last year, I think, right? Maybe before quarantine. Anyways, I'll stop rambling. So, essentially, what we were kind of going for is like, I've always had this thing of like, it's a really kind of snooty attitude to have, but like, I think it was partially growing up in Glasgow, where like there was definitely a period where, and there's sometimes there still is, where like, you know, you, as far as, despite people being like very open-minded to a lot of different things, often like people gravitate towards techno. And me in my like, fuck you, why does that have to be the rule thing? I'm like, I always have this attitude of like, oh, once you start making techno, then it's over. You're just giving up on your like dreams of doing anything more creative than making like 4/4 music. So I was kind of like, how do we make something that is has the feel and energy of something like that, but it's almost like has a tinge of like electro and kind of freestyle in it, like almost like a little bit kind of older Miami-ish, little bit of kind of Italo influence, a little bit of like trance influence, but it still lives in this world where it's not really this or that, or like it's kind of like an amalgamation of different things that seem to work together, and I think both Tegan and myself share this sort of and it's also, I also feel like it's he's from Montreal, and there's a lot of similarities between Glasgow and Montreal as well, but there's definitely like a slightly sort of hedonistic aspect of like looking for like real kind of euphoria in music as well, like real sort of like uplifting without relying on the usual sort of like cheesy uplifting elements. So what we have here, I think we have, I will go through the mixer tracks. I think we have, I'm sure if like 808 stems from drum machine. I'll just sort of periodically mute and unmute things here. I'm very, very keen also on like not necessarily like strictly sticking to a grid. Like this is like roughly on a grid, but I tend to place things by ear rather than by like where a quantizing thing says it should sit. I think that I feel like it gives it a little bit more of a kind of human feel, and I don't really use like swing settings or anything like that. I don't use sort of like algorithmically based swing settings or anything. I just kind of go by placing things by ear, and I think maybe some of that comes from DJing as well, where like maybe something is like a couple of milliseconds or 10-20 milliseconds off or something, but the feel of it is right, despite like from a technical standpoint the grid says it's not right or some shit like that,
right.
So I tend to like move things around a lot by hand. So a couple more of these. Horn thing there. It's great. It's just kind of like crash on me now. And then here. Usually like to do like with synth parts, I like to record them from hardware. Like I have a bunch of various sort of hardware synths and things like that, which tend to, there's always this fucking argument of like, does do VST sound better? Does hardware sound better? Blah 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 blah. I think there's plenty of arguments for either side. But I think when there's particular sounds that I'm looking for, generally, if the hardware version of it is available, I will lean towards that. So this is Prophet 6. Different elements, but again, like I tend to lean towards, for these things, like not I tend to lean towards using hardware if it's available to me, and also because like I think partially also because like growing up, I was always like, wouldn't it be insane if you had like actual synths and things like that? It's sort of like, no way, I have like some real synths now. So it's kind of fun to play around with things where you have like an actual like tactile control on them. So what else have we got here? Let's see. Bass. So yeah, it's a pretty simple song, but we were kind of, again, we kind of wanted to make something that like almost had the feel of like a, you know, Tour de France song or something like that, or like some that like you know, has a certain feel of excitement without relying on the usual kind of tropes of how a lot of sort of modern dance music is made. My friend Gina did some vocals. So yeah, I mean, definitely something that, I mean, there's a fair amount of, let me drag this mixer over if it means. There's a fair amount of things going on here, but nothing that I think definitely something that took me a very long time to, I mean, most of this three couple of things on the master, but I think something that really took me a long time to get past is the idea that like every element needs to have like 10 plugins on it or something like that, or like that every aspect has to have 8 million things on it, basically. And I think, in a sense, you know, it's good. It's good to, excuse me again. It's good to, for a period, have that kind of curiosity of like, oh, I wonder what happens when you add this to this, and then I'm going to put this EQ on, and then I'm going to add that, and I'm going to add that, and then, you know, that's all well and good. But then I was finding often I would end up finishing something or getting it to the point I was happy with it and being like, why does this sound like fucking garbage? Like, why can't I get the mix sounding good, even though I have 8,000 plugins on it, thinking that like that's the key to the more plugins you have, the better something's going to sound, or whereas it's almost like the inverse of that is true. So I think getting to the point where you're and there's still a lot of elements here, but getting to the point where like you know exactly what every element is contributing, and things that are not really contributing anything, you probably don't need them in there. Like there's a lot of things that were in this that are now muted or now, you know, I think that these are the kind of things that in my experience and in my you know, time spent doing these kind of things that only become apparent much later in the whole process, is that like, for me anyways, like maybe having 250 tracks of like synth sounds is like actually like detracting from what you're ending up with. But yeah, so I mean it's a relatively simple song. I was going to show one other one as well. I was going to show, let me see, where is it? I think it's this one. But yeah, I think, hold on, let me see. I'm trying to get this chat window to open because I thought I saw like questions in that. Cannot get my chat window open. There we go. I guess someone earlier said, how did your music vision change since first days of your career till present? I think oh great, it's wonderful FL Studio crashing again. I think.
Well, don't worry if you can.
I'll get it loaded up. It's fine. Let me see. Music vision. I think like my overall vision is kind of the same. I think, like I said, I would say the thing that has changed for me the most, again, is like I think what has changed for me the most, to be honest, is going through like long periods of That's the right way to put this. Going through long periods of really fucking hating everything that you make, which I think can also be good sometimes. But long periods of like writer's block, things like that. Going through long periods of thinking that the key is to just like wait to suddenly be inspired, which, you know, those are not, I find that those sort of approaches really just don't work for me at all. But I spent a long time thinking that like that's how you do it. You like stay up all night every night working on shit, get up at like 3 p.m, hate all the shit that you made the fucking night before, like scrap it all or don't finish any of it, start a bunch of new shit, hate all that, like, or just don't make anything for a while, or you know, and I think that's now changed in that, you know, I think it's a skill to learn the it's incredibly fucking boring, but like the sort of disciplinary aspect of it, like doing it every day, and if I don't like what I made, that's fine, you know, but I'm exercising that muscle of like making something, not being as trying to not be as like critical of myself with like everything that I touch, trying to like grasp the kind of mindset of like, doesn't matter who you you know, who your idols are, whatever, like nobody is making shit where just like 100% of their creative output is impeccably genius, you know. It's just not really the case. It's generally that like you're in the habit of trying to make something every day, or trying to make something the amount of time you can spare when you have time to work in the studio or on your laptop or whatever, like making something, and you don't like it, so what? Like doesn't fucking matter. Like exercising the muscle of just making stuff, and again, like trying to get out of the headspace of I'll make something when the inspiration lightning strikes me or something like that, which, you know, in the past has led me to just like not make anything for like a fucking year or something like that. I think that, you know, even if in that period I'd made just a year's worth of garbage, that would be fine. But like to be sat there for a year kicking my own ass and also not doing anything, I think is actually like incredibly, like, even more counterproductive. I don't know if any of that makes sense.
Totally. Thank you so much for walking us through all of that, Ross. And yeah, I feel like I don't see any other additional questions in the chat.
I was going to go over this. Do you still see my shared screen here?
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah.
I did this in another video, but this was like this was a song from the Kanye album Life of Pablo, and I talked about this in another video, but I just so often with, I guess, when you're working on projects, albums, whatever, where there's like a number of producers involved, often there's like a lot of various versions of songs, and like things are incorporated from one version of it, and you take like a kick drum from this person's version, and it all sort of gets sculpted into a song. But we'll play. Let me know if you can hear
Step up in this bitch like I'm the one you bitch like.
So this was from Life of Pablo album, and there's a bunch of the reason I often talk about this is because like I also feel like it's useful to sometimes like demystify a little bit the often these types of songs, they're relatively like again, there's sometimes like not a massive amount of elements in them, and it can be interesting to see how like big songs are broken down, and this is like a really simple, kind of pretty simple instrumental. It literally just has some chords that I did here. Which is literally just Omnisphere, and that has like really like standard built-in Fruity Loops like slicer thing on it, things like that.
Step up in this bitch like I'm the.
I think there's like bass sound here. So yeah, I think that's literally like that's a circle VST. I mean, there's really like not a lot in this at all. Circle VST, which is like a great, really good, like very inexpensive VST, couple of like effect things, but overall, what is this here? There's a sample that was in the very original demo version of the song that I took out which is this.
That pussy, y'all.
Not that. Let's see. That's, yeah, this. Which ended up being taken out, so I sort of muted it and replaced it with the synth sound. But again, like relatively simply put together. Yeah, I mean, I just sometimes feel it's interesting and useful for people to see like how these kind of things are. I mean, there's nothing on the master. There's a little bit of EQ or something, but very, very like kind of basic. Anyways,
Great. Thank you so much.
no problem.
Even for me, who's not a producer, it's pretty cool to see that that all broken apart and broken down. Thanks for sharing an insight into
No problem.
how you make truly some of the most groundbreaking sounds that exist in modern music.
Well,
Thank you. And thanks for all of your insights into, the early parts of your career and and how you've moved through it and sharing your personal space with everyone. I'm sure it's really exciting for people who are looking to, well, not emulate your career, but, who are inspired by what you've managed to do and who have huge ambitions to become producers in their own right and continue to do the work that they do. Thank you for taking the time today.
No problem at all. I think, what was I going to say? I'm going to say something else. I think, I guess someone said here, what advice would you have for achieving the maximal sound?
Oh,
They achieve maximal sound. I mean, again, I'm like extremely hesitant to, like, I fucking hate putting like weird, dumb, like genre names on sounds and types of sounds and things like that. But I think in my experience, like making things that subsequently ended up being referred to as like maximalist style of production, I think I was just wanting to like fill as much of the stereo field as possible with like, oh, this is happening over here, this is going here, this is going here, this is, so that when I put on headphones and like listen to it in the dark, I would be like, this is fucking crazy, like where does this sound come from, and then this blends into that and it happens into that, and it's like, and it's still, I still, even though I feel like, it's another thing that I always find with my own stuff is that like as soon as something is like, and it's it's probably to my detriment actually, but I've often found like when something becomes like a style of production being done by like a whole bunch of people, that's usually the point where I'm like, fuck that, I'm moving on to like some other shit. So that's why I'm always reluctant to like remake the same kind of sound of something that I did fucking like 12, 14 years ago or something like that. But I guess achieving that sound, I was like taking a lot from people like Machine Drum, like Jimmy Edgar, those kind of people. Just like real like filling the stereo field with as much crazy panning and crazy like different elements as I could possibly fit in it. Which
I'm so sorry to cut in, Hudmo, but we've run out of time for the session, and but thank you so much for coming in. Thank you, Eve, as well for hosting the session as well. It was really great to hear from both of you, and thanks everyone for joining in. We'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.